I would like to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon, David Hyde. We'll have a short Q&A with David following his presentation, so please, there should be a question box on the right of your screen. So if you record a question there, we'll get to questions for David following his presentation. David Hyde is a global cannabis industry advisor with more than 7 years of hands-on experience guiding cannabis companies and governments on business and licensing strategy, regulatory and policy approaches, cannabis facility design, operations and security, and corporate governance. David's cannabis sector work spans 18 countries and includes engagements with multinational cannabis companies, foreign governments, cannabis startups, R&D, testing companies, local governments, and investors. David acts as an independent advisor to cannabis companies on matters of corporate governance, regulatory compliance, and due diligence. He has worked on high-profile files related to regulatory enforcement action, restructuring, and board governance within the cannabis sector. Please welcome David.
That's great, Neil. Thank you very much for that flattering introduction. Much appreciated, and it's a pleasure to be here today to share some thoughts really on the cannabis industry, really the status of it, and I think how that connects into thinking about security. I think for many of those on the call and the speakers will know that I have a long history in the security industry and really pivoted about 7 years ago to work really exclusively in the cannabis security area, and then I broadened out from there to include licensing, compliance, international risk, a number of other areas that really tie into the global cannabis and hemp industries. So I'm going to share a few thoughts I think that really sets the table, hopefully, for the rest of the presentations, and really what cannabis security is up against, what it faces, and the challenges that are currently in play in the sector as a whole. You know, for several months now, the cannabis industries really in Canada have been at an inflection point, in my view. As a general rule, Canadian cannabis companies have tried to do too much and have taken on too much debt in many cases. Many have failed to focus on business fundamentals, and that includes the attention in some cases to security and risk. On the public sector side, cannabis stocks have taken a real beating. Canadian cannabis public companies have been punished for failing to perform in terms of revenues, responsible spending, and profits. The capital has dried up, has become a recurring refrain in Canadian cannabis. Far too many companies have run out of growth capital, in some cases working capital, and this has led to some companies going into bankruptcy protection or into very lean financial times, which obviously throws up some unique challenges for security. Failure to pay employees, employee layoffs, financial losses to shareholders can increase the security risks that's associated with things like diversion, inversion, and employee disgruntlement at a time when many cannabis companies frankly can't afford to properly protect themselves. Equity capital has dried up, leading some cannabis companies to borrow through debt instruments at really predatory interest rates. In some cases, this has led to the slashing of security budgets and difficult times in terms of rationalizing a reasonable security program. Cannabis companies have discovered that cultivating good quality cannabis at scale consistently is bloody difficult, very elusive, and far too much low to mid-quality cannabis has been grown, leading to inventory write-downs, write-offs. Many license holders are holding extensive inventory of product, which in turn can increase security and crime-related risks. The mantra that the cannabis industry is highly regulated is exceptionally true. The regulatory burden remains high for license holders, and it significantly increases operating costs, placing a drag on business growth, and in some cases, stifling innovation and differentiation in an industry that frankly was set up to compete with the black market that's completely unrestricted. They don't have the restrictions that the legal market have, and they can just apply their product indiscriminately. Against this perhaps depressing backdrop, we're seeing price compression, competition for retail shelf space. The tax burden on cannabis products shouldn't be understated, including the unseemly tax on medical cannabis in Canada. These are all things that put pressure on profitability. To compete against the black market, and given the high tax burden on legal cannabis products, value product offerings have become popular in the cannabis space. And again, this puts pressure on prices, and with that, company profits. As all of this unfolds, it's almost like one side of the industry continues unabated. New license holders continue to enter the market at an unprecedented rate. Like when I said on record for an article maybe 4 years ago. We're going to see 400 license holders one day. I was laughed out of the conference rooms. And right now we're over 500 federal license holders, obviously around 1,200 retail stores and growing. And the pace of new applicants for federal applications is as high as 20 per month. So it's still very much a growth industry with people piling into, to the license holder realm. The COVID-19 pandemic has not helped, and it's tightened the screws on many cannabis companies, including exacerbating personnel and procedural security challenges within many license holder facilities. So that first kind of lineup there of really, if you look at it through a SWOT analysis lens, the Canadian cannabis sector, that's some of the weaknesses and threats, okay? So it's a little bit of a depressing picture. And some of the folks on the call that'll be talking to you from holding cannabis security positions in the industry, they felt some of that pain, and obviously are dealing through some challenging times. But it's not all about the weak points. Let's talk about strengths and opportunities, because behind these dark clouds that have formed around the cannabis industry in many respects, there is sunshine lurking. And for some cannabis companies, I think there's going to be a silver lining. Let me run through a few reasons why I believe that's the case. I think we're turning a corner later on this year, early into next year. According to Stats Canada, the overall cannabis sector, so legal and black market, is growing and growing fast. Overall, it contributes a staggering $10 billion on an annualized basis to Canada's GDP. So get your head around that for a second. $10 billion in economic activity coalesces around cannabis, whether it's, again, the legal or the black market. Almost $6 billion annually is attributable to the legal cannabis market, almost 50% higher than the black market. That's overall spending across everything that relates to cannabis in Canada. So despite the challenges of COVID-19, we've seen a steady rise in legal retail cannabis sales after a very painfully slow rollout. We've gone from under 300 stores in mid-2019 to over 1,200 stores at the end of summer 2020. Ontario is adding around 40 stores per month, and total store count in Canada, I believe, is racing towards 2,000 as we go into next year. At some point, we should expect to hit that 2,000 mark. Supply needs and sales are increasing exponentially. A sign of the times is the Ontario Cannabis Store opening a new warehouse in Guelph, Ontario, which will expand its product offerings and drive up sales in Q4 2020 and beyond. So the cannabis sector has also benefited from a designation as an essential service in many parts of the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. So despite the very challenging retail sector in Canada, the cannabis retail sector hasn't fared as poorly and has been able to take advantage of that essential service billing, if you will. After years of stifling cannabis regulations, federal license holders are seeing signs of reduced red tape at a crucial time as they face COVID-19 related business challenges. So the regulator has realized, perhaps a little belatedly for some, that they must adapt to a right touch model of regulation, which speeds up licensing and removes some of the shackles from license holders to enable them to operate more efficiently and profitably. I predict that the recent loosening of red tape will continue and will incorporate more friendly marketing and advertising regulations in the foreseeable future. The regulator has no choice but to adopt this stance given what's at stake in an industry that, frankly, they created and have an obligation to regulate and facilitate. I think we're going to see improvements in the approach to taxation and benefits flowing to both cannabis companies potentially and the public in the form of harmonized tax systems, rationalized tax rates, and particularly and somewhat belatedly with respect to medical cannabis, which is still taxed at full freight and frankly is a national embarrassment. That should never have happened. We're seeing increased segmentation in the cannabis industry, which throws up unique challenges for security professionals and security service providers. Vertical integration has really been abandoned. The necessary retrenchment by most of the larger cannabis companies that have had to rationalize their operations, reduce their spending, narrow down their lofty aspirations, and really right-size their business has opened up a lot of lanes for new and revitalized license holders, including an increasing number of craft and legacy market players. In the early days, the legacy market really had there was a door slam to those folks that actually pioneered the cannabis industry, and more the realization has come that white guys in suits like me don't grow good cannabis, and the reality is that we need to have a market that is absolutely built on the backs of the pioneers in the industry, who are the legacy market people that were the first people in growing cannabis, providing it for medicinal use. Of course, there's been some abuse over the years, and that's present in many industries, but a lot of the cannabis industry today is built on the knowledge and experience of people that have been doing it for decades and doing it before there was a legal market in place. We're seeing innovation come to the fore as both new and, I'm going to say, rebooted license holders, the ones that have had to revisit their game plan and kind of come out as a 2.0, if you will. They're applying lessons that have been taken from earlier industry participants who learned the challenges the hard way. License holders today are pivoting, they're adapting, they're narrowing their focus and taking advantage of improved market data in revisiting who they want to be and how they can apply business fundamentals to what they're doing, rather than the kind of lofty dream of this cannabis sector that had so much promise, the green rush, so to speak, that's really ended up being certainly a significant business opportunity, but you cannot take it for granted, and you cannot take the public markets for granted, and that telling the story is just not the way things are anymore. We're also seeing a level of maturity in the cannabis retail sector as store numbers increase, and we're seeing creative marketing online, a variety of different forums, and product knowledge and customer experience are rising to the top of priorities for retailers. And we're really seeing those stores that are dialing it in properly are being successful and are able to not only sell cannabis products, which they have a reasonable margin, but it's somewhat capped with respect to taxation, etc. You have ancillary products and other things that can bolster sales, and we're seeing some really smart approaches there, again, which throws up some unique security challenges. So to wind down this kind of little bit of an overview of the industry, which I think will help us to put today's presentations more in context as what we're up against as security professionals. The early days of adult use legalization, I mean, we're about 2 years into that now. A couple of days ago was the 2-year anniversary of recreational adult use cannabis legalization in Canada. And the early days, supply delays led to inferior product that was often too dry for customer appreciation. It was often terpene depleted, regarded as poor value by customers. The internet and Twitter was replete with complaints about product quality, etc. That's giving way now to more superior product. We're seeing better choices. We're seeing better quality. The producers have dialed it in a lot better, and the product ranges have now increased with the regulatory expansion as well. So I believe strongly that looking into 2021, the Canadian cannabis sector holds a lot of promise, and it's going to reward those who can innovate and compete with a fairly crowded marketplace and have the right team doing the right things, navigating the regulations in a very sometimes creative way, and essentially ensuring that what they're doing is based on strong business fundamentals. There's been far too much of a lack of that, frankly, in the cannabis sector since its inception. So, in winding down this first section here, and I'm going to hand across in a few minutes to Neil and to the group for any questions that you have. I'd love to drill down on anything I've been talking about here. What does this all mean in the context of cannabis sector security? I've kind of given this kind of doom and gloom section at the beginning, but then a much more rosy outlook. We're still fighting our way through the last part of the gloom part of doom and gloom. We're still not quite there yet, although we're seeing great signs within some parts of the industry. And I think that we are heading into much better territory, and security will be able to kind of focus more on what it should be doing versus how it supports the survival of the company or how it can operate at razor thin spend. So, let me share a few thoughts, particularly for federal license holders in terms of security priorities. I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to need to continue to do more with less. The reality is that there just isn't the budget in many cases. And much as I'm going to say a lot of the folks that are tuned into this call and that are as panelists and speakers, many of us have come through the security industry and have dealt with lean times, where the security budget gets slashed, or you find out that what you thought you had in the budget, you suddenly have to make do with a lot less. This is one of those times, and it's going to go on for a little bit longer. So what do we do in that situation? We look at co-opting non-security staff and management staff to act as important extensions to the security team. Okay, it's not putting those people in harm's way, but it's using them as eyes, as ears, as extensions, as viewfinders into security and safety and risk within the facilities and across the cannabis ecosystem. It's training retail staff on the front lines to be that visible deterrent and that active communication with all the customers who enter the store. This is just 101 for people that work in security and loss prevention, but it gets lost sometimes when you hit difficult times. So now's the time to really co-opt everyone that we can in terms of being eyes and ears and extensions of the security department and the security mandate in cannabis facilities. Adjusting and delivering security awareness training has never been more important. At a time when we have some license holders that are going through financial difficult times, there are some cases where maybe vendors weren't paid. There are some cases where wages haven't been paid. It's unusual, but it happens. And that can lead to some animosity. It can lead to worry amongst people. It can lead to anxiety. It can lead to anger from folks that didn't get paid a bill that they expected to get paid as a supplier. And this all has an impact on the security and crime-related risks at cannabis facilities that are going through those things. So, to deliver training and awareness to not only your staff, but also contractors and other folks that may come onto the site, truck drivers, other people that again, all these people need to be told what the rules are, what's acceptable, and if they see certain things, they should bring it forward to security. A lot of work can go in on the security awareness side, again, extending beyond the security team itself. A critical thing in my view for those sitting in senior security roles in cannabis companies is to learn and apply the slightly more liberal interpretations of the cannabis regulations vis-a-vis security. And I can't overestimate that or overstate that, sorry. There's a set of regulations called the cannabis regulations that dictate, what security mandates are in place. And it's, 8-10 bullet points. It's not actually an overly aggressive and scary looking thing, but the implications of it are very far reaching. They reach deep. They cost a lot of money. They cause challenges to operational efficiency. And there's a lot in there that needs to be navigated, even though the words on the page look a little bit innocent. So the point I'm making is, as we march down the track, the security directors meeting and talking with each other and sharing what they're seeing through the lens of regulation and through their experiences with the regulator and through ways that they're innovating. This is good information to have, because all of the security rules that Health Canada as the regulator expects to see aren't written out on a sheet of paper, or they're not on a roadmap document. They're in the email exchanges that you have with Health Canada. They're in the other license holders that where security dealt with a novel situation, and you can avail yourself of that information and then apply it to your situation. And in many cases, there's ways to actually apply that knowledge to save money, to make security more effective or more efficient, to achieve better outcomes when it comes to the security delivery. So, to me, it's critical that as we look at moving forward in this cannabis industry at all levels, retail and the manufacturing and production side, cultivation side, there's a fairly heavy regulatory burden. And it's up to us as industry participants to understand, what those regulations state with respect to security, to give feedback to the regulators frequently as to what we believe should be adjusted. I was fortunate to be in here at the very beginning. Back in 2013, I got a lucky phone call out of the blue from a cannabis company, and ever since then, I really saw this opportunity was something special that I wanted to really get into and have an ownership stake in, frankly. And so right from the very beginning, I've been, and for those who know me, probably some people on this call, I'm not scared to speak my mind, and to tell people what I'm thinking. And, I did that with Health Canada. I was very open in saying, look, your early regulations they're too heavy. They're too much focused on physical security and technological security, and they're not focused on procedural and personnel security, which is the glue, as any security pros know. It's the glue that holds everything together. So we had security programs back between 2013 and 16 that were completely focused on the physicality of security, vaults, locks, keys, heavy-duty doors, etc., key control, and on technological security, cameras, access readers, intrusion systems, etc., panic alarms. But the focus on procedural security and personnel security, staff safety, diversion of cannabis, which is a procedural issue more than anything else, was really absent. There was nothing in there. And when they came out with the new regulations in 2018, a lot of those things that were discussed at industry forums, the feedback loops that Health Canada created, and folks like myself who were a little boisterous in giving their feedback on some of this stuff, it's amazing how many of those got taken up. And we saw the need now for an organizational security plan that actually, connotes security SOPs and talks about how we need to approach security from a more holistic standpoint. And you're going to be held as a regulatory standard to what's stated in your organizational security plan. And you must have a head of security that understands the regulations and is able to make sure that the organizational security plan is maintained and secure operations are maintained as well. If there's a loss or disappearance of cannabis or these kind of things, then there needs to be someone knowledgeable that can execute on those security commitments. So, it's come a long way from where we were back in 2013 and 14, and a lot's improved, but there's a long way to go. And I think the way that we navigate the regulations as security professionals in the cannabis space, whether you're providing systems, whether you're a service provider providing security staff, whether you are in the industry as a head of security for an LP or for a retailer, it's incumbent on you, if you want to be successful in the cannabis industry, because it's a little unique, as many here know, you need to understand the regulatory prescriptions, and not only what's written on the page, but what it actually means to people who hold these licenses. And if they deviate from that, they could put that license in jeopardy. The stakes are really, really high, and there's not a lot of margin for error, which is why we need to make sure that it's such a priority area. The other, and maybe I'll end with this thought in terms of a few of the security implications of kind of where we're at now in the industry in Canada. Given the COVID-19 challenge that we continually face now, and it's going to go on obviously for quite some time longer, we're now thinking about security offsite. It's one thing to think all about the physical, procedural, personnel, technological security, and how that program hangs together on site, where we have a finite defined area, and we know we have a defined population, and we can have some stability and certainty to how we're delivering security and the context in which it's being delivered. Thinking about security offsite, it's a very different proposition. And some things might be a little more straightforward, but some things are very challenging. Just look at IT security, for example, an area that frankly has not been on the radar very much for the regulator and has not been a priority in the cannabis industry beyond those companies that have come to their own conclusions about its importance and have applied effective IT and cybersecurity policies and steps in their businesses, but they're not required to do so in many cases. It's really the federal and provincial privacy acts that require you to have certain protections over certain types of information, but there's not a lot at the Health Canada regulatory level that prescribes IT security. So as we think about security offsite, a remote working population, we have to think about security through a different lens. And it does throw up a lot of unique challenges, I would suggest, for people. And I think that that's something that security professionals that are in the space, security service providers, ancillary support companies, and those looking to get into a job in the cannabis industry in the areas of security, health, and safety need to think about this, because this kind of new reality, not only is it going to be off-site working, remote working, teleworking, due to COVID, but inevitably, a lot of companies have found, and particularly in the cannabis industry, where some functions of some roles can be done off-site effectively, there may be money to be saved by actually applying a remote working paradigm beyond COVID. So, we have to think about that not only for today, but how it applies moving forward as to that that kind of remote work aspect as well. So with that, I'm going to wind down. I'm going to say thank you very much for your attention there, and I'm going to ask Neil to step back in again, and we can certainly go through some questions on all of this.
Thank you very much for your presentation, David. That was very insightful. As David mentioned, we're going to move into a Q&A period. I see a couple of questions queued up for David. Once again, if you do have a question, there should be a little box on the right of your screen. Go ahead and enter that now, and we'll get to as many as we can. First question for David. What are your top 3 security concerns for the cannabis industry based on your experience?
Top 3 security concerns. I'm going to say one is just the financial pressures that's going to take away the ability to have an effective security program. I'm a little bit concerned about heads of security being able to make that case in very difficult financial times to have a level of security that's commensurate with the threats and risks they face. So I'm a little bit worried about that. In terms of other things, I think given all the financial difficulties we've seen in the industry and the pressures on license holders and the question about survivability in some cases, I do worry a little bit about diversion. I worry a little bit about, cannabis companies that are going through difficult times that perhaps don't have a good governance program and don't have an effective leadership and security programs. And I'm a little bit concerned about, I'd hate to see precedents set of diversion or of crime in cannabis facilities, because really, frankly, we've seen surprisingly little crime that's been unfolding in cannabis facilities. There has been some, not all of it publicized. But there's a couple of, I think, things that concern me. I think beyond that, it's just really weathering the storm. Like I said, right now it's been, and I think when we get to the panels later, some of the guys I'm sure are gonna be candid with you about what their challenges are and how they've had to do more with less. So I think that's that'll be the third one, Neil.
I was muted. Do you see standardization of the Act happening? It seems more opinionative than standard from LP to LP and consultant to consultant.
Yeah, there's really never been truer words said. I mean, that is, I just about an hour before this got rid of the nervous twitch that I've had for the last 7 years from working in this space where you just think you got your head around a certain security prescription. Health Canada has this is what the Act says. This is how it's been interpreted at 25 license holders that I've physically been to myself, and I've seen it manifest in front of my eyes. I go to number 26, and they're allowed to do something different. And it's like, hold on, after 7 years in this space, I'm not saying I'm the expert. A lot of smart younger folks on this call, but I should have seen most of the stuff that's out there. And for me to keep seeing things that essentially kind of go against my understanding or go against the interpretations that I've seen in writing from the regulator. So all this to say, I think that what we've seen is an improvement in 2018 when they brought out the security guidance documents, or 2018, 2019. So we do now have a guidance document that does give us more on security. And I think what I would expect to see is in the next round of adjustments, I do think you'll see adjustments to that guidance, and I do think you'll see a little bit more clarity around some of the security clearance areas. But overall, look, this is interpretive regulation. Regulation is not supposed to be prescriptive, and to a certain degree, there's many ways to meet the regulations, and it's up to the people in responsible roles at the license holder to interpret those regs, get expert advice that they need as when they need it, but you got to chart a course and you got to demonstrate that what you're doing resonates with what it says in the Act and the guidance documents.
Here's another good follow-up question. What is the best resource available to review the regulations?
The best resource to review the regs, I mean, you know, there's definitely guidance documents that I think are helpful. There's a security guidance document that is a very helpful document. It's available on Health Canada's website, I believe. I'm sure one of our smart co-panelists will probably pop that on the chat for me. I don't have it at hand. You know, there are what's called the Cannabis Licensing Application Guide, another document that is used for new applicants, and it has the security sections in there. And in my view, that document is an essential read for not only people participating as security in the industry, getting their heads around what the licensing requires at the front end, but it's also for service providers and other folks that want to understand, integrators, for example, that want to understand the kind of standards that are expected. You know, everyone in federal kind of cannabis world understands the evidence package requirements, which is a video walkthrough and a whole lot of evidence to become licensed as a federal license holder. And that has a significant security portion to it. And those guidelines are all in that licensing application guide document that is, in my view, so helpful. And, you know, frankly, one of the biggest pain points that I've had working in security in this industry is, you know, trying to lay out good guidance for partners groups that we're working with, and unfortunately not getting the traction, whether they didn't quote the extra hours in the project, so it's a little bit of a surprise, or whether there's just a communication disconnect, and we very often end up with a system that's amazing, great system, but it's not calibrated or nor directed in the way it needs to demonstrate conformance to the bureaucrat in Health Canada sitting there on a Friday night, not very happy with their life, that's actually assessing whether this license holder is going to get granted this week or next month. So these are really critically important things. So there's also a license management guide. It used to be a separate PDF, now it's online. All of these documents have security sections in them, and I'd recommend that you look at those sources for some of your guidance, as well as the cannabis regs themselves.
Okay, we have a couple more questions queued up. I think we'll probably have to wrap it. Are there well-documented government regs around the transportation of cannabis in Canada?
That's a really good question. I mean, the short answer is no. You know, but there are guideposts in the regulations and in several guidance documents. The first thing to think about transport is that it's security and it's biosecurity. So physical and the quality biosecurity elements, and they have to work in tandem in order to have a successful program. There are requirements under the cannabis regulations that the license holder must have safe and secure distribution, which includes transportation. There's also requirements that the quality of the cannabis be maintained during distribution, which includes transportation. So this throws up all types of things. And in a document called the GPP guide, it's the guidance document for good production practices, which is the quality paradigm in the cannabis industry. They give examples, which Health Canada, you know, have on their radar, and it talks about doing pre-qualification or pre-vetting of transportation providers. It talks about the environmental conditioning at times when you're shipping certain types of products. It talks about the reliability of suppliers and the mechanical, effectiveness of vehicles. You know, we can't have risks that you get this delivery towards the tarmac at Pearson, the truck breaks down, and in sweltering heat, you know, the cannabis spoils. There's many millions of dollars. We talk about bespoke cannabis insurance for freight with cannabis, very, very specialized. So I'm only giving you a teaser. There's a lot more to transportation. And in my view, it is a very, very underappreciated area in Canada in terms of the security and in terms of the regulatory compliance. And I do think that it is going to become more important. And I think it's something that more license holders need to get their heads around and really have a very fulsome program before somebody gets, written up for a serious breach here.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes, so maybe one more quick question. Can you speak to the unique requirements of business strategy being attached directly to security programs and/or guidance?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to interpret that question. I guess, I mean, since I've been working in security, to me, I've always been a business manager with a focus on security. All the way through my education, master's degree, Wharton School, as-is program, on and on we go with certifications. I've always put business first and security second. So the first question I'm going to ask myself is, what's the industry? What are the regulatory prescriptions? What are the unique risks in this industry? What type of things am I up against? Who's on my side? Who can I bring in onto the team to put them into security, positive roles that can help to unveil the security program? And then really, to me, the strategy here is you cannot practice security in this space unless you have a seat at the table where the senior decisions are made and you're understanding what's happening not only in the industry, but in that particular business. Everyone's pivoting. So the business strategy right now is in flux, in my experience. And so security people have to be very curious, very pushy, and get into those boardrooms, figure out how it's pivoting, contribute to the pivot, and then get their heads around where this business is now going. We're not going to be now all things to all people. We're going to reel in some of the international stuff. We're going to focus more on these different areas of the business, and we're not going to do other certain things. Every single one of those changes of direction has security implications to it. So short answer, could definitely have a whole session talking about security and business strategy, but my advice is laser focus on the business strategy first. Get the weather first, understand what you're up against, tether the security strategy to that, adhere to the regulations, and run a holistic program that covers off the 4 pillars. And that's a great start.
Great, thank you, David. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time today. Is there somewhere people can reach you, like a website or somewhere where they can get in contact with you that you want to mention?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm available at www.hydeadvisory.com is the best way to get through to me. And I think my email also is on the list of presenters today. So really appreciate the opportunity, Neil, and thanks everyone for your interest. And this is a really, really critical area and a critical time for cannabis security right now. So we really appreciate you guys tuning in and wanting to learn more.
Great, thank you very much, David. We really appreciate your time.